first. If you're going to be a leader, not just a manager or not just an individual performer, you've got to get your team to be more competent with what they do.
I can
The third one
absolutely
is,
appreciate
yeah.
that, because I've absolutely been there. And it's kind of interesting. You said something about how the individuals kind of work with each other, because I've always said that if you're an employee, let's say, that it's your job to make your boss look good. And it's your boss's job not only to protect you, but to make you look good as well.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back to the Professional Rule Breaker Show, where we have these amazing entrepreneurs and business people that will give you tips that you can hopefully go ahead and put into your business today. My name's Kathy Walterhouse, and I am your host. And I want to say, be sure to subscribe, because you don't want to miss the fun that we have on this podcast. So today I have a gentleman by the name of Andy Neillie, and he has been turning managers into leaders for 20 years. As a best-selling author of the book Golden Principles, as well as Executive Presence, he's an award-winning speaker. He combines his own entrepreneurial experience with his marketplace perspectives to help organizations develop top-performing leaders. So I want to welcome to my podcast, Andy.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Kathy. Looking forward to interacting with you and your audience a bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I have to say, what makes a top performing leader? Because there's a lot of people out there that think they're leaders. So
and I Googled not too long ago leadership books, and there's like more than 4,500 of them that have been published recently. And Kathy, in some respects, you as the rule breaker, you're always looking for what's that new edge. You get kind of, once you get to Marcus Aurelius and Jesus Christ, there's really not anything new in leadership. It's the same old stuff. But I've been looking at entrepreneurs who lead, small business leaders. I've been working with Fortune 500s as well. What makes a manager, not just a manager, but a leader? And I really do think it's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. You and I talked briefly a few minutes ago about these 4 leadership necessities: conviction, competence, character, and covenant. Kind of an old-fashioned word, but I think you and I will unpeel that a little bit later in just a few minutes. And I have been able to talk with managers worldwide, and particularly here in the States. If you want to know, am I becoming a high-performing leader? If you're developing in those 4 areas, I think you're on that path. So it's not overly complicated. That doesn't make it easy, but there's a simple grid of excellence for an emerging leader.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you use the term managers and then you use the term leaders, because there is a wide divide between those two.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because a lot of people end up having manager on their business card: general manager, site manager, regional manager, team manager. But that doesn't mean you're a leader. And as you said, there's a wide gap there. If you and I could net it out simply, in some respects, managers are in charge of things. Leaders are in charge of people. Now that's a gross simplification, but that begins to get at some of the nuances. So it's not, are you a manager or a leader? The best managers are also leaders.
Right. But that's interesting that you said that a leader is in charge of people, because my viewpoint is that leaders are absolutely in charge of people, because it's their job to make their people look good, as well as almost hold them by the hand and lead them into some area of success.
Yeah, I think that's well put. That the idea of servant leadership that Robert Greenleaf in his book more than 25 years ago kind of brought back to the forefront. Leaders who really understand leadership realize I'm at the bottom of the pyramid. I'm not at the top of the pyramid. And that's one of the distinctions. I'm here to lead my people and make them successful. Kathy, I think the thing that needs to be balanced around that is leaders inside organizations are still responsible to the mission of the organization. And if I could use that dog analogy from my book that you mentioned, the Golden Principles, as you and I shared, my wife and I rescued 10 golden retrievers over the years. I think they've taught me more about leadership than any of the books that I did or the dissertation studies I did. If we had rescued a dog with special needs or a dog that came out of a bad environment, we need to be firm with that dog to teach that dog how to live as a healthy member of society, so that serving that dog is not just being nice to them. Being kind to them means saying no. Being kind to them, teaching them to walk on lead. Being kind to them, teaching them to wait until they're invited in to come in. In some respects, the challenge of servant leadership is recognizing you're serving both your people, but you're also serving mission and cause and strategy. And that's the balance. You have to make hard decisions at times as a leader, decisions your people may not understand or feel like are the right decisions, because your commitment is, you know what, we're a startup. We want to make sure we're here next year. We've got to make these hard decisions if we want to continue to serve our mission and be profitable.
I love that analogy because, it almost reminds me a little bit of parenthood.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
If you have children, that's your responsibility. All those things that you just said, and the analogy to the golden retrievers and all the rescues that you've done.
Yeah. We have a dog in our home right now that's actually a friend's dog that we're helping her settle down. And he's a rescue. He is the friendliest dog in the world, but he gets reactive at times. And he is muzzled at times. And we look like we're mean people, and he has a muzzle on in public, but really we're protecting him until he learns people that approach him are safe. Right now, because of his background, he thinks people that approach him and look at him and make eye contact are dangerous, and he might nip them. So we've got to work with this dog to help him understand. So making him do something that looks not nice is really the kind thing for him. And so, you and I might spend the next 20 minutes talking about dogs, as I said, because I think most of my
which I could, because I have 3 rescues. Yeah,
okay,
I have 3 rescues. And I was going to say, you could probably help me with my dogs then too. Who knew this podcast would turn that way?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me ask you about, you had listed 4 necessities of leaders.
Yeah.
So let's talk about those.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be kind of brief, but really went, I've been interacting with leaders for decades. I've got a dissertation study that required me to go deep into leadership effectiveness. I read broadly in an area. When I look at good leaders, these 4 leadership necessities, they all consistently demonstrate them. And I tried to make them a memorable. There's 4 C's. The first one of conviction really has to do with strategy and seeing the longer term picture, at times being able to make the hard short-term decision. This is the business planning side of things. This is knowing we've got to staff up for the busy season, or this is knowing I don't have the right people in the bus yet, or I got them on the bus, but now I got to figure out the seats. Strategy or vision. I use the C word, conviction, simply because it worked in my acronym, but it's that frontline people have their eyes down. They're thinking about today, tomorrow, this week, maybe this month at the most. Even, you work a lot with entrepreneurs and salespeople. We're always pushed to, are we going to make our numbers by the end of the month? Sales leaders are looking at the quarter and the year and even next year. That's that conviction piece. The second piece, the competence piece, probably the biggest challenge I have when I'm working with solopreneurs who are now staffing up their team. You got to quit making the pies. What your job, your competence. Now, Marshall Goldsmith wrote about it in his book, "What got you here won't get you there." You've got to help your people execute. And again, Kathy, you could share stories, and you probably have with your podcast audience, on sales managers who stepped down in income personally the first year they adopted a team because their job was to make the other people successful. And that required them to not always lead every sales call, not win every piece of business, help their people be successful. That's the execution side of things. If you're going to be a leader, not just a manager or not just an individual performer, you've got to get your team to be more competent with what they do.
I can
The third one
absolutely
is,
appreciate
yeah,
that, because I've absolutely been there. And it's kind of interesting. You
yeah,
said something about like how the individuals kind of work with each other, because I've always said that if you're an employee, let's say, that it's your job to make your boss look good.
yeah,
And it's your boss's job not only to protect you, but to make you look good as well.
yeah,
And I think that comes into that competence
yeah,
piece.
I think so. I think so. I'm working, my wife and I own a number of small businesses. I'm a lot like a lot of people that listen to your podcast. I have my leadership coaching and consulting business. I also own some local businesses, and you're exactly right. I've got 125 people working for us. When we do the best job of leading them well, they don't need me. That's the whole point, right? They are well trained. They're given what they need to be successful. They understand our core values and our mission. And then I just kind of get out of their way. When you and I need to insert ourselves, it's when somebody isn't being able to execute on the assignment, their job description, the mission that they have in front of them.
No, absolutely. And you had mentioned a little bit earlier. So for everybody that is listening, not watching, so Andy is actually in a coffee shop because he had to go
Yeah,
put out a big fire.
yeah, yeah.
But we decided to
Not
go
a,
ahead with a
that, yeah,
podcast since he
that's right.
has so much value to add. So you said, I mean, it's so competence is maybe like when people, you have to step in when your
Yeah,
folks are not quite where
yeah.
they need to be. So it's like putting
But
out the fire
right,
sometimes. It's
exactly right. Or taking that step back and getting them some training. The thing that I want our folks that are listening in and watching to understand is the leadership competencies have more to do with managing risk, with knowing when to let go, with holding hard conversations, with stepping away and letting somebody else drive, and knowing that they are trained and equipped well enough. The problem of managers is it's that, you know what, just let me do it because you're not as good as I am. Well, that's a management syndrome. So leaders, they manage risk because they say, all right, I'm turning this responsibility over to you. You better do a good job. And that's part of that competence thing.
so how do you get, because everybody has heard of micromanagers.
Yeah.
So obviously they're not a leader. So how do you get a micromanager not to micromanage
Yeah.
and turn
I
them
mean, that's
into
a great
leaders?
question. Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a balance of two things. One of the sayings that I've invested into my management team. I've got about 7 managers that report to me in the small businesses we own. We work as an enterprise team across several locations. One of the truisms I push into them is a good leader has a critical eye without a critical spirit. You see everything, but you don't say everything. And part of that is knowing there are some hills to not die on. You've got to be able to walk away from things that aren't going to impact long-term mission, long-term profitability and sustainability, that aren't going to impact culture. You know what? That's not the color we should have chosen for that office remodel. But you know what? That's below my pay grade at this point. You're going to end up hating that color in 6 months. But I'm going to let you do it because I trust you. And it's a scary thing to take your hands off the wheel, particularly for some of the folks that follow you because they're entrepreneurs. The reason they're successful is they're almost compulsive about executing with excellence. But if you're going to grow your business, you have the opportunity to influence more broadly, but you've also got to give up some control and walk away from those small decisions. It's not your company car anymore. It's not your CRM anymore. It's theirs. And if they choose to leave gum wrappers all over the floor of the car, if they choose to not get caught up on Zoho or Microsoft Dynamics as promptly as you would, but they're still closing their numbers, Management competence says I'm training my people to not be me, but to be them with excellence.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's you have to almost pick your battles
Yeah.
and let your people grow. And at the same time, as you let your people grow and they take over more, then it literally gives you leverage, right? It gives you a chance to spend time in whatever your zone of genius really is,
Yeah.
rather than in the minutia of the things that probably drive you crazy.
Yeah. Well, and that's, you use leverage. I think a good visual picture for those of us that remember like geometry from 8th grade is a good leader is simply a fulcrum. You can take small effort on your part and you get a lot of effort on your team members' parts, and you can really move the universe. And this whole discussion you and I are having really kind of points toward the final leadership necessity. Let me finish that journey real fast, and because we talked about the first two, uh, um, conviction and competence. The third one, Kathy, you could talk as much about this as I could in terms of the character of a leader. People, well, the study after study, people join jobs for organizations. They leave because of the people they work for.
Yes.
Fair-minded, honest, other-oriented, hardworking, that the character traits, can you answer the question, am I the best boss that this person has ever worked for, is intimately tied to, am I one of the best people that they've worked for? And that doesn't mean you and I ever have to be perfect. None of us are going to be perfect, but to understand the type of leadership we're talking about, it is other-oriented leadership. It's Simon Sinek's book, Leaders Eat Last. It's this understanding that my first job is to make people successful. And then a lot of our conversation really has led me. I struggled with what I call the fourth leadership necessity. I struggled with defining it. When I was working with folks like you that were really good and other people, their communication was consistent. They had alignment with their people. Even if people were working remotely, they felt like they were plugged in. For a while, I said a leader has consistent communication. They're conscious of their people. And then I stumbled upon an old word that probably needs to be back into our vocabulary more, and it's the word covenant. And this fourth leadership necessity, covenant. It's interesting. Here in the state of Texas, where I live, if somebody is to get married, it's obviously a personal relationship of love and fealty, and they have family and friends get together, and there's a ceremony where love and affection are exchanged. There's also a formal document that's signed by the officiant and submitted to the state of Texas. There is a marriage covenant that is both a personal and a formal structure. And that finally connected for me, because when I see effective managers who are becoming high performing leaders, they balance the job of the job with the work of the people. And, very practically, that means some of the folks that are listening into you right now on this podcast, that they've extended PTO for somebody because their mother had cancer, and nobody's ever going to know that this person was paid another 3 weeks of salary, even though they didn't have it in their books, because that was the right thing to do. And so this balance of, I'm there. I'm your boss. You report to me. We're going to have formal annual reviews. I'm going to write you up if I need to write you up. I'm going to hold you accountable. Is balanced with, at the end of the day, I want you to have my personal cell phone number and reach out to me if you need me. That covenant aspect that really, in some respects, encompasses all of the leadership necessities, I think.
I think it's almost, I love that. I think it's almost like the golden rule, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Treat others as you would like to be treated, or something like that.
Exactly
Some
right.
version of that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right.
Because I think everybody appreciates kindness and empathy, when it's an appropriate time. And at the same time, they probably appreciate firmness, constructive criticism, ways to grow as well. So if you can combine all of that together, I think it just brings, it's almost like it makes success, I would almost say like exponential, right? It
Yeah.
makes it
Yeah. So,
easier for the person to have success, for the company to have success, for whatever it is, the offering, the
yeah,
relationship, everything to
exactly
have a
right.
success. And I think when you don't, because I think all of those four that you mentioned are really important. And I think if
Yeah.
you're missing one, that's when things like start to fall apart in a company.
Well, and that's why I said at the beginning of our time together, this is simple because you don't need to think about, am I trying to grow in 50 different areas? If you're trying to grow in 4 areas, there's not 14, there's not 50, there's four. But if you overlook any of those four, your leadership suffers. And so it's that point you brought up a couple of minutes ago about leverage. When we do these things well, it leverages the work of the people that we support, that report to us, that are part of our team.
Absolutely. And I also think that there is an overt feeling that comes from all of those when everybody is working,
Yeah.
towards the same goal. It's almost like you get excited to go to work. You
Yeah.
get excited to get up in the morning. You can't wait because you got to go meet with a client and you're super excited because, hey, you met your numbers, but it's also cool because you met your numbers and maybe the entire team met
Yeah.
their numbers. It's like almost like a feeling, because I've been in those situations where I've worked for a company where everyone is just pushing each other, and helping each other. And then I've worked
Yeah.
in the opposite where there was just crazy infighting. And if you were successful, people came after you and just like
No.
crazy stuff. And so I love those 4 points that you made that I really think all companies should really strive for that. I know in my company, that's what I strive for. And I have to say, I have some of the best people in the whole wide world that work for me as well. And I'm very fortunate.
So cool.
I'm
Yeah.
very fortunate, knock on wood or whatever I need to do, but they're amazing. And what I love about them is they are just as engaged in making this successful as I am.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing is at the end of the day, it looks like they're doing most of the work, but you provided that environment of um, grace and accountability, if we could put those words together. That's why 20 minutes ago I made a distinction between a nice boss and a kind boss, because there's a
Mm,
difference there. You can't be a pushover. You can't let them get away with whatever they want to get away with. You've got a mission. You've
right?
got that strategy that you've got to accomplish that ultimately allows them to really, do what you said a minute ago. The satisfaction of a job well done. It's like coaching a sports team. Does somebody want to do 50 gassers on the basketball court because coach said they need to do 50 gassers? I suspect not. But are they going to want the outcome of being in better shape than their opponent in the fourth quarter because of what the coach made them do? And so in some respects, they need somebody to hold them accountable because they want to do well what they want to do well. And that's the job of a leader, is simply freeing their people to excel.
Absolutely. It makes it a team spirit, a team, the
Yeah,
company, instead of it being individual employees, it literally
right.
becomes one giant team. And I actually do think, though, in the corporate world, sometimes the term team gets overused
Thank
or
you.
it's not necessarily applied there because they're missing like one of the
Yeah,
four, or they're not as strong
yeah.
in one of the four, but yet they're still talking about team.
Yeah, no, I echo what you said. And one that I even get a little bit more up on my soapbox about is all over LinkedIn, where I spend a lot of my time networking with clients and prospective clients. And in the business environment, everybody says my company's a family. No, your company's not a family. If old weird Harold, Uncle Harold, shows up at Thanksgiving, everybody knows that he's going to sit in the corner and say inappropriate things and not contribute. If you're the leader of an organization, you're not allowed to have Uncle Harold sitting in the corner. Your business is not a family. It's a mission driven organization trying to accomplish something important. So death to the acronym that my business is my family. You're not a good leader if you really mean that, because you're not allowed to have your Uncle Harold sit in a
That's
corner,
right.
a top performing leader.
So, what do you say to companies like when you go into a company and they obviously they have some good points and then they
Yeah,
have some, like, out of these four, they're missing some
yeah.
things. How do you get them to realize that they need to make a change?
I think you and I could probably tell each other stories about clients we worked with who wouldn't hear what we had to say because they didn't want to hear it. And I think part of the job of any good leader is having hard conversations and knowing how to have hard conversations. Indeed, I might even say managers get the easy conversations, leaders get the hard conversations. I'm working with a client right now who they've targeted somebody in their C-suite as a future CEO to take over the company. And Kathy, quite honestly, I've worked with this client long enough that I have my doubts. This person is a great organization person. They dot the I's, they cross the T's, they make things run smoothly, they streamline things really well. They're a perfect operations person. I'm not sure they want to grow in their people skills enough to be a CEO. And having that hard conversation with the other folks sitting around that table and with this person, it's all about strengths and weaknesses. And there is nothing wrong with being an operational ninja. Use those strengths for the organization, but don't promote this person into a place where they will be frustrated and the organization will suffer. Part of your job and my job as outside consultants is to hold those hard conversations and help them move forward. And just like you suspect, I suspect, Kathy, you've got some great successes. And you've also got some clients that they just never quite got what you were saying. And as a result, they didn't grow the way they could have gone.
Right, exactly. Because I think what it is people sometimes get stuck in like a tunnel vision
Yeah.
because they've spent so much time on whatever it
Yeah.
is, and they're missing the big picture.
Well, and in some respects, I don't think you and I should even blame them in 2023. We've had more change thrown at us in the last 4 years than probably in the 20 years prior to that. And all of us are just kind of limping from the rules keep changing. So one of the challenges for your folks listening in is, how do I practice that covenant? How do I love on my people? And I'm comfortable using the term love in a marketplace environment because love means I'm doing the best for you. It's not just an affectionate feeling. It's I'm doing the best for you. It's an action word. How do I love on my team members well? And how do I remain viable and grow in today's tough economic? The leaders got to balance that with hard conversations, decisions, kind rather than nice, eyes open without micromanaging. The four leadership necessities, maybe a simple grid, but this is work that you and I never finish growing in.
Oh, yeah. No, there's well, first off, I don't think if you want to be successful, you should stop growing. I think
Right.
there's always room for growth, 100% of the time, 100% of the time. And yeah, I mean, you're so right with what you said. Yeah, it's sometimes it's a challenge, like a real challenge.
Yeah.
And then there's other times where it's easy. So the thing is how do we make it easy all the time?
Yeah.
That's probably like the big question.
Yeah. Although really, maybe not easy. I would say, how do we make it satisfying all the time? Because again, you've got a number of people that are fans of yours that they enjoy hard work. It's that satisfaction of a
Oh
job well
yeah.
done. They just want
I
to know
like
they're
to work
making a
hard.
difference. I know we all do. I think it's
I don't
wired
think
into
we
our
would be
DNA.
entrepreneurs if we didn't
Exactly
like to
right.
work
Exactly
hard.
right.
That's probably
But
one
we
of the
need to
toughest
know.
jobs.
Yeah, we just want to know we're making a difference, right? We want to know that this is, kicking a dent in history in our marketplace. This is helping me provide for myself and my family, and my team members provide for themselves. This is making my community a better place. This is answering a need in the market. Whatever that is, that's what true leaders want. They want to go to bed at night saying, you know what, we didn't get there, but we're further down the road than we were.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I always ask everyone that appears on my podcast, what makes you a rule breaker?
You asked me that a couple of times now earlier on when we were corresponding and dialoguing together. The truth of the matter is, I'm not sure I'm a rule breaker. I'd like to say I'm a simplifier. And so, like these four
Okay.
leadership necessities, in some respects, I've taken 2,500 years of leadership literature and leadership best practices, and I boiled it down to a simple grid. You want to know manager, you want to know entrepreneur, you want to know startup person, you want to know sales manager. If you're not just managing, but becoming a high performing leader, ask yourself questions in those four areas. So I'm not sure that's a rule breaker, but that I think clarifies a lot of clutter out there, because as you said, everybody is growing in leadership, personal leadership. There's thousands of articles and thousands of books written every year, and they're all saying essentially the same thing. So I think if there's a rule that I've broken, maybe it's the rule of let's just talk about this too much. No, it's simple: conviction, competence, character, covenant. You work on those, you're working on becoming a leader.
Okay. Hey, I have to say, I think you're a rule breaker, and take that as a compliment.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So where can people find you, Andy?
Well, a couple of things. Just neillieleadership.com. And, my name is spelled a little bit oddly, as you and I laughed about earlier. Neillie, neillieleadership.com, all one word. And they'll go to my website. I've got a blog they can sign up for. I write regularly about leadership stuff and access any of the resources. Kathy, you're going to get a kick out of this because you're so good at your business, and I'm trying to be good at my business. A year and a half ago, one of my coaches said, Andy, you just need to have an offering available and find a way to make it easily available. And I went on the Google search. Kathy, I was able to buy leadershipmaterials.com. Nobody owned it. And I thought, what do you mean nobody owned it? Every good name is already owned, but leadershipmaterials.com wasn't. And if your folks want to download, I've got a simple little ebook that talks about those hard conversations. In fact, there's a worksheet, 13 best practices, and a planning document. There's a coaching model on there, and there's a way to practice affirmation conversations. It's a simple 8-page ebook that's available if they go to leadershipmaterials.com. Couldn't believe that I could actually still buy that website. I thought all the good leadership websites were already owned, but I own that one. And
wow.
They go there, it'll take them to a landing page where they can download that ebook. Yes.
So I think that's great. For anyone that is listening or watching, make sure you go to leadershipmaterials.com
that easy.
and download Andy's ebook, because I think that is going to have a lot of value for your business. So I want to thank you for being here today, because you just so many, like, I love those 4 leadership necessities, those 4 points. You made them so clear and so concise. And for whatever reason, every time you're talking about each one of those, I had all these visuals going across my head. So I think that's really important for folks to go ahead and go to your website. And I just also want to add the message, because I think the thing that leaders really want to do is they want to make a difference in the world. And I know for me, that's one thing I've always wanted to do from when I was very, very young. But that's also something that you, as a listener, as a watcher, can also do. Everyone has the capacity to make a big difference in the world. And some of you who've been listening to my podcast repeatedly have probably heard me say about throwing a stone into a stream and watching the ripples. And as a leader, you have the potential to do that and to make a really big difference in this world. So again, I want to thank my guest today, Andy Neillie, and I love everyone that's on here and listening. And be sure to subscribe and catch us in the next show as well.
Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.